Seneca said, "The man who fears poverty will always be its prisoner, even when his pockets are full." What's up? I'm Leonidas, and today we're going somewhere different. Not spreadsheets, not compound interest tables, not a step-by-step action plan with 5 bullet points. Today we're going back roughly 2,000 years to a Roman philosopher named Lucius Annaeus Seneca, who wrote some of the most brutally honest things ever put to paper about wealth, poverty, and the fear that sits between them. And I want to make the case that what Seneca understood about financial fear in the 1st century AD is more directly applicable to your life right now than almost anything written in the last 20 years. Because the tactics of personal finance are well documented. The psychology underneath them, the thing that actually stops people from using the tactics, is almost never addressed at the depth it deserves. Seneca addresses it, and he does it in a way that changes how you think, not just what you do. Quick note before we go further. Nothing in this video is financial advice. This is a philosophical and educational video. The financial principles I reference are for thinking purposes, not prescriptions. Consult a professional for decisions specific to your situation. Now, let's meet Seneca. Lucius Annaeus Seneca was born around 4 BC in what is now southern Spain. He was raised in Rome, educated in rhetoric and philosophy, and eventually became one of the most powerful men in the Roman Empire, serving as the personal tutor and later chief advisor to the Emperor Nero. He was also extraordinarily wealthy. Seneca accumulated one of the largest private fortunes in Rome through inheritance, patronage, and historians suspect some practices that were less than philosophically pure. He owned multiple villas. He lent money at high interest rates across the provinces. He lived, for most of his adult life, in a condition of spectacular material comfort. And then, because the philosophy was real to him, he spent the last years of his life writing letters to a young friend named Lucilius, trying to give away everything he had learned about money, about fear, about what it actually means to live well. Here is what makes Seneca uniquely interesting for a financial philosophy conversation. He was not a poor man writing about the dignity of poverty. He was not a monk preaching detachment from a cave. He was an enormously wealthy man who had experienced both the seduction of money and its complete insufficiency, and he wrote about both with the authority of someone who knew from the inside. His argument is not, money doesn't matter. His argument is, the fear of not having money matters more than you think, does more damage than you think, and operates in ways you probably haven't examined. That is a richer and more useful insight than either money is good or money is bad. It's a precision instrument for examining your actual relationship with financial fear and then doing something about it. Most of what we're drawing on today comes from Seneca's Epistulae Morales, his moral letters to Lucilius. He wrote 124 of them in the final years of his life, on topics ranging from how to handle a crowd to how to think about death. Letter 18 is the one I want to focus on most today. It is specifically about the practice of voluntary poverty, and it contains one of the most counterintuitive pieces of financial advice ever written. But to understand why that advice works, we need to understand the Stoic framework it comes from. Because Seneca wasn't just offering a tip, he was building a way of thinking. Stoicism is built on one foundational idea, and once you have it, you can't unsee it. It is called the dichotomy of control, and it was stated most precisely by Epictetus, another Stoic philosopher, who was born a slave and became one of the most influential thinkers in Rome. Epictetus divided the entire universe of human experience into 2 categories: things that are up to us, our judgments, our desires, our responses, our character, our choices, and things that are not up to us, our health, our reputation, our wealth, other people's behavior, external events. The Stoic position is not that you should not care about things outside your control. It is that suffering arises from treating things outside your control as if they were inside it, and that most of what we call anxiety is precisely this confusion. Now apply that framework directly to your relationship with money and poverty. Poverty itself, the actual condition of having insufficient resources, is outside your control in the sense that external events can produce it regardless of your behavior. A recession, a health emergency, a job loss. No financial plan is fully insulated from external events. But your fear of poverty, your anticipation of it, your dread of it, the way it shapes your decisions long before poverty itself arrives, that is entirely inside your control. That is a judgment. And judgments are up to us. The Stoics argued that it is almost never the thing itself that destroys us. It is the story we tell ourselves about the thing. A man who loses his job and believes he is ruined will make desperate decisions from that belief. A man who loses his job and believes it is a temporary condition requiring adaptation will make entirely different decisions, often better ones, from that belief. The external fact is identical. The judgment is different. The outcomes diverge dramatically. Seneca wrote, in various letters, about how fear operates as a self-perpetuating trap. His argument is worth sitting with slowly. The man who fears poverty will not take the risks that increase his income, because the downside of those risks, to a fear mind, feels like catastrophe. He will not negotiate his salary, because what if they say no and he loses the job? He will not start the business, because what if it fails and he loses everything? He will not leave the comfortable but low-paying position, because what if the new thing doesn't work out? The fear of poverty, in each of these cases, is actively producing the poverty it fears. Not always, not inevitably, but systematically and in ways that are largely invisible to the person inside the fear. You cannot see clearly from inside a fear. That's what makes it a prison. The walls look like caution, the bars look like wisdom, and the man inside believes he is being reasonable. The Stoic antidote to fear is one of the most counterintuitive practices in all of philosophy. They called it premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils, the deliberate, systematic contemplation of the worst things that could happen to you. Not to depress yourself, not to rehearse catastrophe obsessively, but to rob the worst case of its power over your present decisions. Here is the reasoning. Most fear operates in vagueness. You are afraid of something you have never fully examined, something you have only glimpsed in the abstract. The abstract version is always more terrifying than the real version, because the abstract version has no limits. Your imagination can make it as large as it needs to be to stop you. When you bring the fear into full daylight, when you ask specifically, what is the actual worst case here, and what would I actually do if it happened, the fear almost always shrinks, because the real worst case is survivable, manageable, and finite. The imagined worst case is not. Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor who kept a private journal of Stoic meditations that he never intended to publish, practiced this daily. He wrote, in what we now call his meditations, about reminding himself each morning of the impermanence of everything he had, his empire, his health, his relationships, his life. Not as an act of self-torment, as an act of liberation. Because the man who has already accepted that everything can be taken from him moves through the world differently than the man who is constantly defending against that possibility. Letter 18 of the Moral Letters is addressed to Lucilius around a holiday period. The Saturnalia a Roman festival roughly equivalent to a very excessive modern holiday season. Everyone around Seneca was indulging, feasting, drinking, spending freely, and Seneca wrote to Lucilius with an unusual recommendation. He said, I'm paraphrasing the spirit of what he wrote, choose a number of days during which you will live with the bare minimum. Set aside your usual comfort, take the plainest food, wear simple clothing, sleep without softness, and then ask yourself, honestly, is this the thing I feared? He was not prescribing permanent deprivation. He was prescribing a temporary experiment in the actual experience of simplicity, as a tool for examining whether the fear of it had any basis in reality. I want to be precise about what Seneca is and isn't recommending here, because it is easy to misread this as asceticism for its own sake. He is not saying poverty is good. He is not saying comfort is shameful. He made his fortune deliberately, and he did not apologize for it. What he is saying is that the fear of poverty derives most of its power from the fact that you have never actually been in it, or that it has been long enough since you were in it that the experience has been replaced by imagination. And imagination, as we discussed, runs on no constraints. It makes the thing as terrible as it needs to be to stop you. The poverty practice interrupts that by replacing imagination with experience. It says, spend 3 days living on very little. Discover that you are still you. Discover that the world does not end. Discover that simplicity is uncomfortable, but not catastrophic. And then carry that discovery back into your normal life as a permanent update to your fear response. Not as a philosophy you believe intellectually, but as something you know in your body. There is an enormous difference between believing intellectually that you can survive with less and actually having experienced surviving with less. Seneca's poverty practice converts a belief into a fact, and facts are more durable foundations for financial courage than beliefs. Let me connect this directly to the practical financial world. A man who has never seriously examined his fear of poverty will avoid the following with remarkable consistency. He will avoid negotiating his salary because he is afraid of losing what he has. He will avoid starting a business or side income because the risk of losing money feels overwhelming. He will avoid investing aggressively because he cannot bear the sight of a portfolio decline. He will avoid taking a lower paying but higher ceiling role because the immediate income reduction feels like falling. Now, imagine the same man after 3 days of the poverty practice. He has eaten simply and not starved. He has worn plain clothing and not suffered. He has discovered that the floor, the actual floor of his minimum viable life, is not the catastrophe he imagined. The risk calculations change, not because the math is different, because the denominator, the feared worst case, is now a real number instead of an imagined infinity. A man who knows in his body that he can live on $1,200 a month if he needs to, makes completely different financial bets than a man who has never found out. The first man can say, I can take this risk, because if it fails, I can survive the floor. The second man doesn't know where the floor is, so every risk feels like it might be bottomless. Financial courage is not the absence of fear. It is the presence of an accurate picture of the actual worst case. The poverty practice gives you that picture. Knowing the real floor and knowing it is survivable unlocks a quality of financial decision-making that no spreadsheet can produce. Seneca makes a second point in his letters that belongs alongside the poverty practice because it addresses the other end of the same psychological trap. He distinguishes between two men who use silver dishes. One man uses silver dishes because he has silver dishes and takes them for granted. His identity is entangled with the possession. Take away the silver, and you take away something essential to how he understands himself. The other man uses silver dishes with full awareness that they are silver dishes. pleasant, useful, appreciated, but not necessary. He would use earthenware with equal contentment. The silver adds nothing to who he is. Seneca's conclusion: the second man is equally great whether he has the silver or the earthenware. The first man is diminished by either, by the earthenware because it shames him, and by the silver because he needs it. The psychological target is not poverty, it is non-attachment, the condition of being genuinely fine with either outcome. Because the man who is genuinely fine with either outcome is free to pursue wealth aggressively without being controlled by the pursuit. Marcus Aurelius ruled the Roman Empire from 161 to 180 AD. He commanded armies. He held more power than almost any single human being in history. And every night, in private, he wrote notes to himself, reminders, corrections, arguments with his own impulses that he never intended for anyone else to read. What we now call the Meditations. The book is striking for one reason above all others. The most powerful man in the world was writing to himself about how easy it is to be seduced by power and comfort, and how vigilant he needed to be against that seduction. He is not congratulating himself. He is holding himself accountable, in private, for no audience. That is a fundamentally different posture toward wealth and status than almost anyone in his position has ever displayed. Where Seneca gives us the poverty practice, the active exercise of living simply, Marcus Aurelius gives us something complementary, the discipline of perspective. Marcus wrote repeatedly about looking at things from distance, about pulling back mentally from the thing you desire or fear until it assumes its actual size. He described the banquets of powerful men and noted that they were just flesh and wine. He described the fame of emperors past and noted that none of them were remembered by their grandchildren's grandchildren. He described wealth and noted that the richest men in Roman history had left behind less than their reputations claimed. This was not nihilism. It was a precision tool for preventing any single outcome, wealth or poverty, success or failure, from acquiring so much weight in your mind that it distorts your judgment. The man whose judgment is distorted by the terror of poverty, Marcus would say, is just as impaired as the man whose judgment is distorted by the intoxication of wealth. Both men have lost the ability to see clearly. Marcus developed a specific contemplative practice that modern philosophers call the view from above. He would imagine pulling back, further and further, from whatever situation was troubling him. From the room, to the city, to the empire, to the earth, to the cosmos. Watching his problems diminish in proportion to the perspective. For financial fear, this practice has a specific and immediate application. When the fear of poverty is most acute, when the market drops and your portfolio looks terrible, when the business is struggling, when the job loss feels catastrophic, the view from above asks, what does this look like from the end of your life? What does it look like from the perspective of everything that actually matters to you? In almost every case, the answer is smaller than it feels right now, more manageable than it appears inside the fear, more temporary than the fear insists it will be. This is not toxic positivity. It is not pretending the problem is not real. It is deliberately scaling the problem to its actual size, rather than allowing fear to scale it for you. Seneca and Marcus wrote in a world of Roman villas and legions. I want to translate their framework into the specific ways financial fear operates for young men in 2026. Because the mechanisms are identical, the costumes are different. The first mechanism is anchor anxiety. This is the fear of losing what you currently have, even when what you currently have is not enough. A man earning $40,000 a year, who knows he needs 60 is still paralyzed by the fear of losing his 40. The number itself becomes the anchor. Anything that threatens it feels catastrophic, even a change that would lead to more. The Stoic question for anchor anxiety: if you lost this anchor entirely, what is your actual floor? And is the floor survivable? In almost every case, yes. The second mechanism is ceiling fear, the terror of getting too close to the top and falling. This shows up as not negotiating the last 10% of a salary offer, not asking for the promotion, not raising prices in a freelance business. The man stops short of the ceiling because proximity to it feels more exposed than distance from it. The Stoic question for ceiling fear: what is the actual worst outcome of asking for more? And is that outcome catastrophic or merely uncomfortable? The third mechanism, and this is the one Seneca wrote about most directly, is preemptive poverty thinking. The man who is not poor but behaves as if poverty is imminent, who cannot make a good financial decision because his mind is occupied by a disaster that has not yet arrived. This man is not being cautious. He is being taxed. Every financial decision runs through the filter of a fear that has no current basis in reality, and the filter distorts every decision, makes him too conservative in investments, too passive in negotiations, too compliant with employers, too reluctant to bet on himself. What all three of these mechanisms share, what Seneca would say they share, is that they are responses to imagination, not reality. The anchor is imaginary ruin. The ceiling is imaginary rejection made catastrophic. The preemptive poverty is imaginary destitution inserted into a present that doesn't contain it. And imagination, left unexamined, is almost always worse than reality. Reality has limits. Reality has flaws. Reality is finite and survivable. Imagination has no such constraints. The entire Stoic project, the poverty practice, the premeditatio malorum, the view from above, is a set of tools for replacing imagination with accurate perception. Not optimism, not pessimism, accurate perception. The man Seneca is writing toward in letter 18 is not a poor man. He is a man of some means who is held back from the full use of those means by a fear that is disproportionate to his actual circumstances. Sound familiar? That is most men in their 20s with moderate income and low obligations. The actual downside of their financial risks is smaller than anywhere else in their lives. The fear, meanwhile, operates at full volume. Seneca would say to that man, stop treating your imagination's version of poverty as if it were a financial statement. Go find out what the actual floor is, and then build from there. Seneca's poverty practice was designed for first-century Rome. I want to give you the 2026 version, not as a novelty, but as a genuine philosophical tool. The exercise has 3 parts. They can be done over a long weekend or spread across a week. The point is not the specific duration, it is the quality of attention you bring to the experience. Part 1 is the floor audit. Calculate your minimum viable monthly budget, not your ideal budget, not your comfortable budget, the actual minimum. What does it cost you to be alive and functional in your city? Rent or your share of it, utilities, food at their most basic, rice, eggs, beans, simple proteins, nothing from a restaurant, transportation, health insurance, or its equivalent. For most young men in mid-tier U.S. cities, this number lands somewhere between $900 and $1,500 per month. This is your actual floor. Write it down. Know it precisely, because this number is the thing you are actually afraid of, and most people have never calculated it. Once you have it, ask the Stoic question: if I were living on this number right now, would it be the end? Is it survivable? In almost every case, uncomfortably, imperfectly, but genuinely, yes. Part 2 is Seneca's exercise, translated directly. Choose 3 consecutive days. During those 3 days, live as close to your floor as possible. Cook the simplest meals you know how to cook. Don't go out. Don't buy anything you don't need. Dress simply. Limit entertainment to what costs nothing. This is not a deprivation experiment. It is a fear examination. The goal is to spend 3 days finding out whether the experience of simplicity is as terrible as the anticipation of it. It almost never is. The anticipation is always worse. And discovering that in your body, not just your head, is the point. Part 3 is the debrief. At the end of the 3 days, write down 3 things. 1. What was the actual experience versus what you imagined it would be? 2. Which of your current financial fears look different now that you have experienced the floor? 3. What financial decision have you been avoiding because you are afraid of losing what you have? And does that avoidance still make the same sense? The debrief is where the Stoic philosophy converts into financial behavior change. Not because you've been told to be bolder, because you've experienced something that has genuinely updated your assessment of the worst case. That update is durable in a way that intellectual persuasion is not. I want to end the main content of this video with Seneca's actual goal, because it is easy to take these practices as ends in themselves and miss what they are pointed at. Seneca was not trying to make you comfortable being poor. He was not trying to convince you that wealth is hollow or that ambition is shameful. He accumulated wealth himself and never pretended that was wrong. What he was trying to do, across all 124 letters, across all the philosophy, was give his young friend Lucilius, and through him, anyone who would read the letters, a kind of internal freedom that external wealth cannot provide. The freedom to act from choice rather than fear. The freedom to pursue income and wealth without being enslaved by the pursuit. The freedom to take risks because you have examined the floor and know it is survivable. The freedom to walk away from things that do not serve you without terror. That is what he meant when he wrote, in the words that have been translated so many different ways, but always carry the same weight, that a man who makes peace with poverty can never truly be poor, because the poverty itself holds no power over him. He has looked at it, lived with it briefly, understood it, and it has lost its teeth. Here is what I want you to carry out of this video. The Stoics understood something about financial psychology that most modern personal finance content does not touch. They understood that the tactics, the savings rates, the investment accounts, the compound interest, are only as effective as the mind running them. And a mind full of undexamined fear runs every tactic through a distorting lens. Seneca's answer was not therapy, not journaling, not positive thinking. It was direct confrontation, a poverty practice that replaces imagination with experience and fear with accurate perception. Marcus Aurelius's answer was perspective, the view from above that scales every fear back to its actual size and refuses to let the mind make mountains out of manageable conditions. Together, they give you a philosophy of financial courage that is 2,000 years old and completely applicable to the decision you are avoiding right now. You know the one. The negotiation you haven't had. The risk you haven't taken. The move you keep deferring. One action for this week. Do the floor audit. Take 1 hour this weekend and calculate your actual minimum viable monthly budget. Write the number down. Look at it. That number is the floor the fear has been hiding from you. And knowing it, clearly, specifically, in writing, is the beginning of the Stoic practice. If this video gave you something to think about, drop a comment. I want to know which Stoic idea hit hardest for you. I read them. I'm Leonidas. The obstacle is the way. I'll see you in the next one.